and that we should spend the majority of our time when it comes to study in the New Testament. And I agree with that thought, except for the fact that there's a lot of things in the New Testament that are talked about as if you should know what they are from the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. And so if we don't have a good working knowledge of how the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible works, or what it was talking about, and talking about God and the covenant from Moses, if we don't have a good understanding of what that is, some of the illustrations and some of the teachings from the New Testament don't make a whole lot of sense. And so I agree that although we are under the new covenant of Christ and saved by His grace through His blood, we do have to have a basic fundamental knowledge of what the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, discusses, because the fulfillment of those things is talked about in being in Christ in the New Testament. And so this morning, to kind of talk about those connections that we have to make from the Old to the New Testament, we're going to go to the book of Hebrews, chapter 9. Hebrews, chapter 9. And going to this text, the Hebrews author is making a comparison between the temple or the tabernacle of the Old Testament, the place where you would go to meet God, and describing how we have a much better dynamic with God through Jesus as opposed to the articles in the tabernacle or the temple. And so let's begin our reading here in Hebrews chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. The author says, "Now even the first covenant, the Old Testament, had regulations for worship in an earthly place of holiness," talking about the tabernacle or the tent. Verse 2, "For a tent was prepared, the first section, in which were the lampstand and the table and the bread of the presence. It is called the holy place." Verse 3, "Behind the second curtain was a second section called the most holy place, having the golden altar of incense and the ark of the covenant, covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden urn holding the manna, and Aaron's staff that budded, and the tablets of the covenant." Verse 5, "Before it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail." And so what we're going to do today is take the opportunity to talk about these things in detail. Because the author couldn't do it, we can. And so we look at this description of what the place of worship, of a connection with the Creator was in the Old Testament. It was going to the tabernacle or the temple later in history. You'd have the holy place where there are certain articles, and then you go into the temple or tabernacle, and there's a most holy place. Within that, beyond the curtain, beyond the veil, if you will, there is the Ark of the Covenant. Anybody seen Raiders of the Lost Ark? Harrison Ford back in the day? So you know what it looks like. It looked just like that. I mean, Spielberg just nailed it. It looked just like that. I'm not so sure about that second part where they open it up, but the outside looked just like that, right? We assume. But in the Ark of the Covenant, the place where the mercy seat was atop this box overlaid with gold, the contents of the Ark of the Covenant are described for us in Hebrews chapter 9. I was talking to one of our members recently, and we were having a conversation about this particular passage. And we're talking about how these three things historically, talked from the author of Hebrews' perspective, how these three things are in there. And we're discussing whether or not the Bible actually talks about those items being placed within the ark or not. Well, I have some good news for that person. We have the verses that show us when they opened the ark and put those items within them. And so for our sermon today, what I want to do is talk about the things that are in the ark and what they were historically and what they mean symbolically for us, most importantly. Just kind of giving you some detail from the Old Testament about the way they would worship, but more significantly for us today, what's the application for the Christian? It's important that I make that distinction because there are metaphors, symbols, and meanings behind those three particular items and why they are underneath the mercy seat of Jehovah God. Y'all with me? Okay, we've plotted our course. Let's move on. The first thing we find within the Ark of the Covenant, the golden box that housed the mercy seat of God, the first thing was an urn or a pot of manna. Now, you may ask yourself, what is manna? Very good question. If you know the definition of what manna means, you know why there's a little bit of irony there. If not, just wait. We find in Exodus chapter 16, beginning in verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you." Now, if you are interested in the context here, you have a long dialogue in which you have the Israelites that are saved from Egyptian slavery, passing through the Red Sea, drowning all of Pharaoh's men that were chasing them. They're going towards the promised land. They've left Mount Oreb in chapter 16. They now know who God is, but they complain about having a lack of food. And thus God says, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. I mean, that's the God that saved them, right? And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. So they've got a complaint. We're hungry. God says, I'm going to make bread rain from heaven for you. And you just have to go out each morning and go get the bread. It's a pretty good deal, right? Pretty good deal. So we keep reading in our context here. We have verses 14 through 17. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer, according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent." And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less. They were complaining about a lack of food. God allowed the bread from heaven to be there every single morning for them. Now, if you know the regulations of what they were to gather and how that process went, the Sabbath, or the day of rest, they were not allowed to gather the food that day. They were to take a double portion on their Friday to be able to have enough for their Sabbath, or the rest day, right? Everybody knows that, hopefully. Do you know the modern day equivalent? The Lord's Chicken, Chick-fil-A. They're not open on Sunday. So what you must do is on Saturday buy 2 Chick-fil-A sandwiches. And you put that second one in the air fryer on Sunday afternoon. That's the way God designed it. I mean, it's just, you know. So that was that. Now we look over in verses 31 through 34 for some more context here. Now the house of Israel called its name manna, because that means in the Hebrew, what is it? So every morning they said, did you get the what is it? What do you mean? The what is it? What is that? It's the manna. The what is it? And they go, yeah, I got the what is it. You got the what is it? That's the question. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. So not bad, right? Verse 32, Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. Now, place something before the Lord in this context literally means put it within the holy place of the tabernacle. Verse 34, and the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony in the ark to be kept. So the first thing that's found within the ark of God, upon which the mercy seat is sat, we have a urn or a pot of manna within the ark. Now we ask ourselves, are there any kind of parallels for the Christian then? We now know that there is a jar of manna, or what is it, in the ark. What's the meaning? What's the symbol behind that for us? Well, wouldn't you know it, Jesus knew about the pot of manna in the Ark of the Covenant. Are you shocked that he knew that? Over in John chapter 6, one of the most difficult passages for us to parse out, Jesus makes an application to that manna about himself. John 6, verse 48. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the, what is it, the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. I am the bread that will give, for the life of the world is my flesh. Verse 58, this is the bread that came down from heaven. Not like the bread the fathers ate and died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. So we have an application by Jesus here. He's saying, you know that God provided what they needed physically to survive when they were being saved from captivity and going to the promised land. God provided for their physical need by giving them bread from heaven. And Jesus says, in a way, he is like that. He came from heaven to feed the people, not physically, but in a spiritual sense, to be that source of life, that source of strength that we are to consume, if you will, by allowing Jesus to be the Lord of our life and by obeying his commandments and following after him. So we have the urn of manna within the ark. The symbol that Jesus paints for us is that just like that bread came down out of heaven for the Israelites to survive physically, Jesus, the bread of life, came down from heaven for the world, including us, to survive spiritually. The second thing within the Ark of the Covenant are the tablets of the covenant. I think it's a fun game to say. How many can I say covenant this morning? So we're at 58 already. So tablets of the covenant. So we're talking about what Charlton Heston had in his hands when he came down from the mountain, right? We've all seen that, haven't we? Right, of course. So Charlton Heston came down. He had these 2 stone tablets. That's talking about the 10 Commandments, in other words. Those were placed within the Ark of the Covenant as well. Over in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 1 through 5, at that time the Lord said to me, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me on the mountain and make an ark of wood. So that's the Ark of the Covenant. And I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets that he broke, by the way, that you broke, and you shall put them in the ark. So I made an ark of acacia wood and cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, went up the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. And he, God, wrote on the tablets in the same writing as before, the 10 commandments that the Lord had spoken to you on the mountain of the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly. And the Lord gave them to me. Then I turned and came down from the mountain, put the tablets in the ark that I had made, and there they are, as the Lord commanded me. So at the time of the writing of this particular passage, they were already in the ark of God, the Ark of the Covenant, right? So we look at this and we say, well, what's the significance between the idea of putting those 10 commandments within the ark? Well, those were a symbol of the entirety of the law from God, the law to which the Israelites agreed. And they made a covenant, an agreement with God to keep the law, and God promised if they did, they would be blessed in the land of promise, the promised land. So that's a representation of the law of Moses, and just these 10 commandments placed within the ark. You got the pot of manna God provides for his people, and you've got the symbol of the law or the covenant or the agreement between the Creator and his people. Can you see where I'm going? Hopefully you can. If you can't, hang on. What's the application for us? Hebrews chapter 10, verses 1 through 4. Let's read this together. For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come, instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect or complete those who draw near. Simply said, the law of Moses was insufficient to allow people's sins to be washed away. The best you could get under the law of Moses was your sins had been passed on to the next year. Every year, more sacrifice. Every year, more sacrifice. Every year, guess what? More sacrifice. It wasn't a perfect covenant or law or agreement between the Creator and his people. Verse 2, otherwise, would they not have been ceased to offer, since the worshipers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have any consciousness of sins? But in these sacrifices there is a reminder of sins every year. Verse 4, because it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. So what's in the ark? They got the pot of manna that tells you that God provides for his people what they need. You have the tablets from the law of Moses. And you're reminded of the agreement that God, the Creator, has with his people. But that agreement only reminded you how sinful you were year after year after year, because the sacrifice of bulls and goats can't wash away sin. If we keep reading to verses 9 through 12, there's something else that's better that we have an agreement with God about. Verse 9, then he added, behold, I have come to do your will. He does away with the first, the Old Testament law, in order to establish the second, the New Testament law. Verse 10, and by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Every single year the high priest had to go into the most holy place after sacrificing an animal to make a sacrifice for the sins of sinful mankind. And the best they could do was every single year you're reminded that you are someone that is lost in sin. When Jesus came as the great high priest, he made one perfect sacrifice for all the sin of all mankind. Which is better? The second. Verse 11, and every priest stands daily at his service, offering repeatedly the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. God established this law with the Israelites to make a point. It is a bloody thing to be a sinful human being. Blood must be shed for sins. And they shed a lot of blood under the law of Moses. After every animal sacrifice, there must be this mental nudge behind those that are sacrificing that blood, saying, you know what, if only we had a better thing to offer to take care of this sin problem. Generation after generation after generation of animal sacrifices didn't make a person holy, just like God was. If only there was a better thing to sacrifice to wash away sin. Verse 12, but when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. Don't miss the irony in the picture here. The author is saying, the high priest, he didn't have a chance to sit down because he was, verse 11, standing daily, offering animal after animal after animal. His job of sacrifice was never done. Jesus, as the great high priest and the great Lamb of God, offered himself once. And then what could Jesus do? Sit down, because his job was done. You have the 10 Commandment tablets that Charlton Heston walked down the mountain with. They put them in the ark to remind the people about the agreement that their Creator made with them, that if they would keep the law, then God was pleased with them. But that law was not perfect. It's imperfect. We are reminded of the law that we have through Jesus. He is the high priest, but he also is the Lamb. And when he offered himself on the cross for our sins, he could sit down because his job was done. Amen? In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2, don't miss this. Paul says these words, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." We are under a blessed new law today because of our great high priest who also was the Lamb of God. Finally, he says, before he's even close to being done, what do we find in the box? Aaron's rod. Aaron's rod. In Numbers chapter 17, verses 5 through 11, we find these words. "And the staff of whom the man whom I choose shall sprout. And thus I will cease from me the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against you." It's going to solve your grumbling and complaining problems, Moses. Well, it didn't, but that was the idea. We're trying to figure out here who God has chosen to be the first great high priest of the tabernacle, later the temple. Spoiler alert, it's Aaron, okay? So Aaron is the guy. But the way he's going to signify whom God chose to be high priest, Aaron, they're going to take their walking staff or their walking stick. Now, does anyone have a wooden walking stick here this morning? Got those cool aluminum ones, right? Is that wood? Okay, well, my grandmother, she would not use the cool, sturdy, medically approved aluminum ones. She had to have an old, dead wood stick that was carved into a walking stick. That's my grandma for you. And that was, at one time, alive. And then someone chopped it off and made a walking stick out of it and put so much shellac on that thing, it was shiny forever. Now you look at this stick that was cut from a tree, covered in 15,000 coats of shellac. What are the chances that I can go and take that dead piece of wood, put it in the dirt outside, water it, put some Miracle-Gro on it, just for good measure? What are the chances it's going to bud and be a tree once more? Dave, any chance? Okay. So it would be a kind of a strange thing for a dead walking stick to be alive with new growth on it, wouldn't it? That's kind of the point. Verse 6, Moses spoke to the people of Israel, and all their chiefs gave him staffs, one for each chief, according to their fathers' houses, 12 staffs. And the staff of Aaron was among their staffs. Moses deposited the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the testimony. On the next day, verse 8, Moses went into the tent of the testimony, and behold, the staff of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. Kind of weird, right, for a dead walking stick to be new and alive again? Can you see where we're going yet? Okay, hopefully you can. Verse 9. Then Moses brought out all the staffs from before the Lord to all the people of Israel. They looked, and each man took his staff. The Lord said to Moses, "Put back the staff of Aaron before the testimony, to be kept as a sign for those that rebel against God, that you may make an end of their grumblings against me, lest they die." That wasn't a threat, that was a promise, right? Thus did Moses as the Lord commanded him, so he did. God made known who he wanted to serve before him by taking that which was dead and making it alive again. Now do you see where I'm going? What's the application for us? In Ephesians chapter 2, Paul writes these words, "And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked." We were as dead as that walking stick was, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now working the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, just like the rest of mankind. We who are here today were once as dead as those walking in the world. Verse 4, "But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead as those walking sticks in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus." They had the pot of manna to remind them that the Lord provides for his people. They had the 10 Commandment tablets to remind them that the Creator had made a covenant or an agreement with his people. And Aaron's rod, a thing that was as dead as a doornail, whatever a doornail is, was brought back to life by the grace and mercy of their Creator. The same exact thing happened to us, folks. In Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16, "Since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. Because we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." Here's our call to action this morning. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace. What was on top of the Ark of the Covenant? The great mercy seat of God. The seat of God is called the mercy seat, folks, because God has mercy on his people, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in a time of need. We are reminded, just like the ancient Israelites, what does God want us to remember? He provides for his people what we need. We have freedom from the law of Moses unto a better law of Jesus the Christ. And God takes that which is dead and makes it alive for service. If anyone this morning is not a follower of Jesus the Christ, if you've maybe forgotten what's so great about being a disciple of Jesus, you can respond now by coming forward and talking to me for a moment. We'll pray for you right now. We'll approach that throne of mercy on your behalf right now. Or you can see one of our elders at the door. If you have a need, respond now while we stand and we sing.